the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences 25th Annual Academy Awards.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, you are looking west on Hollywood Boulevard. Perhaps population changes have swung the motion picture industry away from this historic street somewhat, but it will always remain a little bit in nostalgia and memory, something like 42nd Street and Broadway. Here are the stands, and there is the marquee. And down there in front of the theater, a group of people still coming in, Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh, Margin Gower champion, Leslie Caron and her husband, Mr. Hormel. Here in the Pantages tonight is the world's most glamorous audience, nearly 3,000 strong, all waiting to see the Oscars handed out, and almost all are either rooting for friends or keeping their fingers crossed for themselves. Perhaps if you look closely, and there you can see some of your favorites at the screen. Most of the nominees will be present. Some, of course, as you've heard, are in New York. I see Merle Oberon sitting down there just to the right corner of the screen.
President of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, Mr. Charles Brackett.
Fellow members of the Academy, guests, friends everywhere, welcome to this very special birthday. In honor of the occasion, all the presenters tonight are to be Academy Award winners. A miniature Oscar was once voted to a man for his very special services to the Academy as a master of ceremonies. He's to be our master of ceremonies tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bob Hope.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brackett. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Suspense. I am very, very, very happy to be here at the Academy Awards 25th Annual Award Show. This is Hollywood's most exciting giveaway show. And I want to thank all the wrestlers for relinquishing their time so we can give these awards. Just showed you there's nothing that one group of actors won't do for another. As Mr. Brackett pointed out, this is indeed a wedding of two great entertainment mediums, with motion pictures and television. And with Oscar 25 years old, it's high time he got married. While it's true that he has a child bride, it's a comfort to note that the kid is loaded. In fact, the bride's father is picking up the tab for this wedding reception. But isn't it exciting to know that a lot of these glamorous stars are going to be in your homes tonight? All over America, housewives are turning to their husbands and saying, "Put on your shirt, Joan Crawford is coming." Television, that's where movies go when they die. But I want to say that tonight you regular television watchers will see movie stars you've never seen before. New faces like Mary Pickford, Janet Gaynor, Ronald Colman, and Jean Hersholt. I hope you will give these youngsters the same welcome you give your current favorites. Theda Barrett, George Arliss, Elmo Lincoln, Clive Brooke, Lia DePutty, and Francis X. Bushman. After all, I'm not here to belittle television, because you can't ignore an industry that has brought fame to Chef Milani, fortune to Hopalong Cassidy, and perpetual youth to the Bowery Boys. Just imagine how Leo Gorcey's kid must feel watching TV and finding out his old man is younger than he is. Don't get me wrong, television is wonderful. Today you can sit home and see Broadway shows, go to church in your own living room, You don't have to go outside for anything. I was born on a farm where you had to go outside for everything. But some movie companies are still stubborn about recognizing television. Jack Warner still refers to TV as that furniture that stares back. But movies are still your best entertainment. It's all movies, ladies and gentlemen. And it'll always be your best entertainment. If you don't think so, ask Joe DiMaggio. You don't see him going out with Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. But I want to say for the country that this is a big night for Hollywood. I've never seen so many Cadillacs, mink coats, diamonds, emeralds, rubies, ermine wraps. It looks like a PTA meeting in Texas. And it's a gay, handsome crowd here tonight, but there's an undercurrent of nervousness. The whole thing is like a big maternity ward. Everybody's expecting. And keep your eyes on the losers tonight as they applaud the winners. You'll see great understanding, great sportsmanship, great acting. Some of the losers take it pretty hard. Last year, one actor tried to kill himself by jumping off Gary Cooper. Fortunately, my parachute opened just in time. But I have been master of ceremonies at 5 or 6 of these affairs, and I get a big kick out of it. And, of course, I like to be here just in case. You can never tell. Some year there might be one left over. Look at those Oscars. Isn't that something? Huh? Looks like Betty Davis's garage. No, I think it's rather silly. I mean, all this fuss about winning one of those Oscars. What are they? Just a bookend with a sneer. Don't glare at me, you melted down Stevenson buttons. But I want to tell you, this is the last year that the statuette will be presented in this form. Next year, it'll be wearing glasses. I want to tell you that everything in Hollywood is excited over Third Dimension. It's the biggest thing to hit the movie since Cecil B. DeMille began rewriting the Bible. And it's hard to say... It's hard to say what effect three-dimensional pictures will have on the world. The next generation of children may be born with square eyeballs.
Everybody, welcome to an all-new episode of the Chronic Rift podcast, Facebook Live show here, as he says, adjusting himself in his chair so he looks a little taller in his seat. It's your old pal, John S. Drew here, and I'm flying solo this Sunday morning, March 4th, 2018. Now, as you saw from the longer opening here, I took a liberty here because today we're going to be doing an Oscar preview, and that actually introduction to the Oscars show was from the very first televised Oscars back in 1953, 65 years ago. We're coming up on the 90th, though, anniversary of the Oscars overall. And it's interesting to note, though, that when I put out the call to the Riff regulars and said, hey, I want to do an Oscars preview show, I kind of got crickets. Nobody seemed to respond. Nobody even said, I think Julio Angel Ortiz was the only one who just said a polite no. But everybody else was pretty quiet. And I had to wonder about it. But then, well, as I was looking at the list of nominees, as I'm looking at all the commentary about what's going to be going on the Oscars tonight and such, I kind of got my answer. And we're going to talk about it a little later here on the podcast. Now, for those of you that are new to the podcast, I say Facebook Live if you're listening to this via the audio. Every Sunday morning at 9 a.m., we do this show live on Facebook. And I realized this is our 9th episode, over the last 8 episodes, I really haven't gotten into much about how this whole process is working. I kind of just jumped into it with both feet, and that's kind of the way I do a lot of things, which drives my friends crazy because they prefer more preparedness, so to speak. I mean, frankly, for once, I've actually got a sheet of notes here to remind me of things I need to get done in this particular episode, whereas usually I don't, which is weird because when I do the recorded podcasts, any interviews on Batcave, discussions on OSI Files, Shazam, ISIS podcast with Richard is, even though you wouldn't know it, heavily scripted. We'll go off script and talk about things sometimes that aren't in the script, but it's heavily scripted to sort of keep us on task. Otherwise, both of us would be careening all over the place when you're talking about two iconic television shows of the 70s, and we're being a pair of 50-plus-year-olds goobering about them on a podcast. But I wanted to just sort of get a few things out here as far as the Chronic Rift and what it is and what we do here. This whole thing started back in 1990 as a public access television show in New York City. The show ran for 4 years, and it was hosted at that time by Keith DeCandido, who was joined by either Judy Fenari, who left after 20 episodes, and Andrea Lipinski, who did the rest of the run. There were 100 half-hour episodes. There were roughly about 3, 4, 5, 6. I have to actually look through the tapes. I don't have proper notes on it. Hour-long episodes that we also recorded. Only one went out over the airwaves. So one of these days, actually, I'll also get into editing those into some coherence shape. And when I talk about those episodes, I say them because in recent weeks, I have been releasing episodes of the half-hour public access show here on Facebook, as well as over on YouTube, and archive.org, which not a lot of people know about. That's actually the feed that the Roku channel, where you can also watch these episodes, is located. The way we looked at it was news, reviews, interviews with all sorts of folks in science fiction, fantasy, horror, and comics. And that's sort of what we do here at the Rift, he says, as he takes a sip. I'm back to Batman again. I know I have a lot of mugs, but in the end, this thing is huge. It holds a lot of coffee. It lasts me through most of the show. But anyway, it's a great little mug. I'll see if I can find it on Amazon and put it up on the Amazon page if anybody wants to get a hold of a mug like this. I think they've also got Superman and Wonder Woman and Green Lantern as well. Anyway, and now that's the other thing too. You may notice I've got a headset on. I gave in instead of trying with mics and headphones, because either I sounded like I was way too close to the mic or I sounded like I was in a tunnel when I was talking. I wanted something that gives me a little clearer. Now, this still isn't perfect because it actually gives me a bit of a telephone tonality to it, but it's still better and clearer than anything else I've gotten so far, and I'm going to keep trying to improve the sound. Anyway, he says this going on and off another tangent. See, again, why sometimes you need to have a scripted format. But the show was on for 4 years. We got written up in the Village Voice. We got lampooned, actually, briefly on Comedy Central. I forget the show, but the host made reference to Keith and said the show's name, which was a big thrill. And then the show went off the air, and Keith and myself and Andrea and everybody else went our separate ways and did our separate things. We always kept in touch. Then back in 2008, I was doing some podcasting on my own with a little thing I called Anything and Everything Drushy, which was so pre-recorded package type stuff. It was mostly just me doing old time radio, which was actually then eventually evolved into presenting the transcription feature, which Kevin Lauderdale now hosts here on the Chronic Rift Network. And I said to Andrea, Judy, Keith, and Orenthal, I said, hey, let's do this as a podcast. The great thing about it is you never have to worry about getting on camera. Now, you may notice that's not why they're not in front of the cameras here. As some of you know, we had a bit of a falling out. The only one who I'm still in touch with these days is Keith, sadly. And Keith just hasn't had the time, and I think possibly the inclination to get up this early on a Sunday morning to do one of these, although he has said he will in April, so we'll see. Although in a little while I've got a little surprise for you here with something with Keith on video anyway, and I think it'll surprise him if he ever is watching or listening to this. But anyway, the show went on, and from there I also started the network, which has such podcasts as Batcave Podcast, Shazam, ISIS Podcast, which are basically picking up repeats of stuff that have already been released for well over a year in some cases, but also new content like Michael Faulkner's The Weekly Podioplex, movie news with Denise, who's been on our show a couple of times here. presenting the transcription feature with Kevin Lauderdale, who's also been on the show a couple of times, and Generations Geek with Scott Pearson and his daughter Ella, where they get into all things geeky. The Rift itself has evolved into a pop culture show, and that's why here we are doing an Oscars episode, because when you really think about it, a show about science fiction, fantasy, horror, doing Oscar preview, and I think that's part of the reason maybe why there were crickets. Some of that, anyway, some of it, why there were crickets. I think some of it also just simply was, as we'll get to it when we do my little preview here, because honestly, I was looking at these episodes, these movies, and wondering what the hell. I don't recognize most of them. And suddenly I felt like Bill Murray, and I think that's how I'm going to approach this as far as giving you my picks in a little while for the best of the Oscars this year, because frankly, with few exceptions, I've not seen very many of these movies. And I think actually the Oscars, if anything else, is a way to sort of boost the sales and recognition of those movies that people don't go to see anymore. I mean, it may have been different way back in the days when Bob Hope was hosting it there in 1953. And by the way, speaking of which, take a few moments here. I want to talk about a few things there. I love the comment about the wrestling. And that a bunch of actors sharing the stage and stuff. So even back then in 1953, as much as people like to say, no, back then in the 50s, that was real wrestling. The wrestling, today WWE is fake, but that was the real stuff back then. And they're joking about it being fake. I also love the commentary on television. As a television guy myself, 1953, television's finally starting to come into its own, and the movie industry had to recognize it, including by allowing the Oscars to be televised for the first time ever there. You can actually find a whole collection of clips from 1953's Oscars on YouTube. I'll put a link to it in the show notes if you want to take a look at some more of what was going on. And by the way, that was actually March 19th, so it was actually 2 weeks later. I've noticed that too with the Oscars. They're kind of pushing it closer and closer, earlier and earlier in the year. I don't know why, but whatever. But anyway, getting back to the Chronic Rift. So, I want to thank you for being here, for listening either through the audio, which is great that you do that. Thank you. The numbers are strong. But, I also enjoy doing this. I love getting up on Sunday morning. It gives me something to look forward to and preparing all this. And I'm the kind of guy that works best without a net. I think fast on my feet. I don't like too much. I get nervous when it's too scripted. I get nervous when it's not scripted, but if it's too tight and too scripted, I get very nervous when it comes to something live. I go out on the net a lot with my teaching. I have a lesson plan, but I often veer from it because suddenly someone says something, and that's what, in my opinion, a good teacher would do. So, I just want to thank you. Thank you for being here on Sunday mornings. Thank you for the commentary that you've left behind on certain episodes. A little later on, I'm going to read off a commentary from someone over on iTunes. By the way, speaking of which, the show, the audio is on iTunes as part of the network feed. If you've got a moment, please head on over to the iTunes or to Stitcher Radio or to Google, wherever you get the show. Google Play, I think we have it on. If not, we will soon. I know that we're working on a few of the things with some of the podcasts there. But, leave a comment, because that's also going to help get the show noticed. I really want to make this a regular reality, and I've got episodes planned from now through June, the only exception being April 1st. We're going to be off that week because it's Easter Sunday, so I figure we all get a break that day. But, this is going to be a lot of fun. And speaking of fun, as I mentioned, Chronic Rift, the old public access shows, being released here on Facebook, being released over on iTunes. No, not iTunes, YouTube. I wish iTunes. Wouldn't that be something? Actually, they could be if I put them into the feed, but it's a lot of space. It's a lot of space, and asking people to download those are like crazy. But YouTube, the Roku channel, if you want to watch it on a big screen, and archive.org has the entire series right now up to date for the first season. In fact, actually, in the next couple of days, we'll have the first season uploaded as well to YouTube and Facebook. And speaking of the end of that first season, we've got 2 more episodes to go in that, and I want to preview one here with you guys today. Again, I love mixing things up. If you get into a rut, it gets boring. So usually our show was some news, maybe a review. Keith would do a comic book review, and then we'd have a discussion on a particular topic. So I decided we'd already done an episode on Creation Convention, and we'd already done an episode where we were giving out awards. So I mixed it up again and said, hey, let's just have straight interviews. We haven't done interviews yet. Eventually, we'd work the interviews actually into the show and like maybe leave out the news and reviews and do an interview and then a roundtable discussion. But this was an all-interview special. We had 3 guests in, and I want to preview one here today, which was one of my favorite of all time, with author Thomas Disch. He was very hesitant to come into the show because we were still relatively new, and even though the Village Voice piece had come out, we still came across as the author said, Pollyanna, hey, let's put on a show, which is kind of what I do. I mean, that's the case, but it's fun. And he did come in, and he came in ahead of time to pre-tape it. I guess he figured rather than being part of the whole process there, which actually worked, because trying to coordinate the 2 guests as it was and make sure the timing worked was difficult enough. So he came in ahead of time and taped this segment where he did the interview, and that gave me an opportunity in the studio to map out the rest of the show, because it was only a 30-minute show, no commercials, and actually it was 29 minutes because the public access channel insisted on a minute to run community service type stuff and scheduling type stuff. So anyway, this is our interview with Thomas Disch, who would go on to actually appear a couple more times on the show. A very fascinating man who died a few years ago. Enjoy.
Greetings, one and all, and I'm Keith DeCandido.
And I'm Andrea Lipinski, and welcome to a special episode of The Chronic Rift.
Tonight we're putting aside the usual format for a very special all-interview show, where we'll have 3 interviews with people in the science fiction and fantasy and comic book fields.
We begin with author Thomas Disch, who couldn't be with us tonight, but he came in the other day to tape this interview segment with us.
Thomas M. Disch was one of the new wave of science fiction writers, authors who started publishing in the mid to late 1960s. Like most movements that are proclaimed as changing the face of the genre forever, the new wave fizzled out around the 70s, leaving its members to go back to being writers rather than being heralds of a new age. Disch has not limited himself to SF. His prolific career has seen him writing poetry, such as The Right Way to Figure Plumbing and the recent Dark Verses and Light, children's books like The Brave Little Toaster, which was made into a movie, libretti for theater versions of The Fall of the House of Usher and Frankenstein, plays such as Ben-Hur, and other science fiction novels, such as the classic Camp Concentration, which he published in 1968. His latest is The MD, a horror story, which is on sale right now, this minute, in bookstores from Knopf at $22 in hardcover. It tells the story of an exceptionally bright young boy who acquires the power of the caduceus, which is best known as the symbol of the medical profession, which you saw on the cover of the book, and it follows him to adulthood in 1999, where he used the absolute power that the caduceus gives him to wreak havoc, sort of. Anyway, welcome to the show, Tom.
Glad to be here.
In the part of the book where you get to 1999, where Billy is grown up into Dr. William, you have some very interesting ideas there about how religious authority becomes over the next 8 years. Could you explain a little of how you came about your ideas for that?
Well, there is a interactive television network in the country that allows a televangelist to work in the way that nowadays you would put a disc into the computer and you would be interactive with it. Interactive live TV hasn't happened yet. It could be coming, and when it does, people like Jimmy Swaggart or Jim Baker will have a lot of use for it.
What about the splits in the Catholic Church that you had?
Oh, the splits in the Catholic Church that are in the novel already have happened. There's that man in Washington, D.C., who has the new schism of the black Catholic Church, in the country. Well, I've just supposed that will continue, and that there will be an equivalent white schism, a separatist movement, because so many of the Catholics in the country disagree with what the church is doing. So I've just supposed that that's going to go on happening.
About the subtitle of the book, A Horror Story. When I first picked it up, I was expecting sort of blood and gore and Edgar Allan Poe and Lovecraft. Can you explain
well, there's a certain amount of blood and gore. It is, as it says, it's the MD. And by the time the MD is done, there are a few medical operations and some rather grisly surgeries happening. So for people who require actual blood and literal guts, there'll be plenty of that.
No, I don't require it. It's just sort of the title, A Horror Story. I was wondering if you were trying to reach a particular kind of reader and say, well, this is not a science fiction story. This is
I've done, this is the second of 3 books I mean to do. The first was called The Businessman, A Tale of Terror. The next one is called The MD, A Horror Story. And the third one takes up, which has not been written yet, but the third one takes up another profession, and it will be called The Priest, Gothic Romance. Basically, what they have in common is that they're all set in the same supernatural Minneapolis. I grew up in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, and these books are set there, and each one of them has its own particular handle on an aspect of supernatural existence or belief. The first one had to do mainly with the afterlife and ghosts and such as that. And this one has to do not with the afterlife, but with something that people really believe in, probably more than they believe in any other supernatural element, which is the power of faith to heal and correspondingly to blight, to kill, to hurt. People believe in that element of the supernatural probably more than in any other, because the supernatural always has to do with what people fear. Now, people fear death, and the first book was about the afterlife. But what they fear more than they fear death is what they can imagine happening that could hurt them. And that is disease and pain. And that is what this book is about.
You mentioned faith. In the book, there are a lot of questions of faith and of belief, and of a child believing in Santa Claus, or believing in the god Mercury, or believing in the Christian God, or believing in
Brother Orson.
Or believing in Brother Orson.
Faith is a very interesting thing. It has to do with what I was talking about, what people, if you want to be cured, what they tell you is you've got to believe. If you've really got the power of faith, then maybe you can cure yourself. That's the crucial thing. You have to have the faith. Now, the hero of this book is a child who manifests his faith by insisting that he believes in Santa Claus. And his kindergarten teacher, Sister Simferosa, tells him that Santa Claus is a pagan myth, and he can't believe that. Well, now this boy believes in Santa, and he goes on believing, and he defeats Sister Simferosa. And Santa appears to him spiritually. He has a direct meeting with Santa Claus, but maybe he isn't just Santa Claus. And Billy's whole story is about the power of his faith. And I think everybody believes that faith has that kind of power. And so the two things fit together. First it's Santa Claus, and then it's something else. But as long as your belief keeps getting confirmed by what happens when you're a kid, your belief is confirmed by the fact that Santa brings you presents. And he does, so you've got to believe it.
That's something that you also dealt with in the book, is about how faith changes and how religions change. And in a sense, it's like the old gods don't die, they just sort of change their names. You know? I mean, the god that is, in essence, Mercury in the book appears as Santa Claus, he appears as Brother Orson, he appears as Mercury. And it's sort of an interesting idea you carry through, that the faith is still the same, it's just the names that change.
Mm-hmm. Well, another aspect of that is that all of this begins in the year 1973, when Nixon was in office. There was an awful lot of people who believed in Richard Nixon. And I always thought that that was very much like believing in Santa Claus. That grown-ups who could believe in Richard Nixon had to have the same kind of really childish faith. And in a way it's touching. In a way, a grown-up who can believe in Richard Nixon or Ronald Reagan seems to me like a child. And in a way that's admirable. Everybody respects the faith that children have. But when you grow up, you also understand that faith is also a kind of credulity. And this book is about the double edge of faith. That when you're believing in something that you think is very good, it could also be something very bad. And I think Richard Nixon was that kind of faith. And I think Ronald Reagan was that kind of faith. And it turns out in this case that the Santa Claus that our hero originally believes in is also Mercury, and he's also probably the devil. And you got to watch out what you believe in.
You bring out the extremity of faith in the character of Judge, and other characters sometimes say, well, yes, you know, you can almost admire it in a way, aside from the fact that he's kind of psychotic, you can almost admire it. And he seems to, I mean, he does seem to have very good intentions.
He's an admirable character. He is the hero of faith. And his heroes are Abraham and Jephthah. In a scene later in the book where he is discussing religion with a Catholic priest, he talks about Jephthah, who's a very interesting figure in the Old Testament, who made a vow that if he won a particular battle that God was setting him to go fight, he would sacrifice the first thing that came out of the door of his house, and it turned out to be his daughter. And he did. And in the Old Testament, he is not reprobated for what he does. He is applauded. He lives to a good, long life, and he's one of the judges in the Old Testament. And
you never hear about that story in the Old Testament.
You don't.
Hardly.
Not many people make a lot of it, but it is there. And I think it is one of the most interesting things in the Old Testament, and it is one of the crucial tests of faith. Even Abraham said he would kill his son, but then God at the last moment allowed him to make an animal sacrifice. With Jephthah, that didn't happen. And in the MD, that doesn't happen.
Wow. Yeah, it's funny. I've been watching this as we're going on here, and I had seen it many, many times before, but I didn't realize when he started bringing up Nixon and Reagan. I have to wonder what Thomas would have thought of our president today. But again, I guess that's the other thing too. Life works in cycles. And it also hit me that the Chronic Rift is actually going to be 30 years old in 2020. Wow. Yeah. some good times. I mean, we met a lot of great people, many of whom we're still in contact with today, many of whom, Facebook has been really great about connecting us, which is why part of the reason when I decided to bring the show back as a live show, I said I got to go with Facebook Live, not with YouTube, even though YouTube probably would have had a bigger audience. But I went with Facebook Live. I also just like the way the whole interface is working here with Facebook. But anyway, so folks, keep an eye out here. If you're not on the Chronic Rift Facebook page here on Facebook, head on over if you're listening to this through the audio feed and try and carve out some time Sunday morning here and join us for episodes of the show. One of the other things, as I say, I like to do, I'll put up the links for the MD on the show notes when I release the audio of this so that you can get a hold of it. Plus, I'll also put up links in the Facebook page as well. But something else, too, in addition to, talking about pop culture and stuff, is bringing you news about pop culture, bringing you things of interest that might point you out. And we usually have a segment on the show called Bringing It to the Table. I'll keep this brief here. I just really want to point out really quick this great book I just got in the mail the other day called Information Please by Martin Grams. Now, I haven't met Martin Grams yet, but I've actually worked with him on a couple of his books, helping him copy edit some of the material. And this guy, I love the fact that he's doing these books on old-time stuff. I mean, he's got one on Truth or Consequences coming out. He's done The Green Hornet, which I've used on my Hornet Sting podcast as a reference source. And he gets into the details. And he does it in a way that is well-organized. He's a great writer. I mean, I only just got this the other day, and I'm almost halfway through it already. And what I love about this one in particular, Information Please was an old-time radio show. And I say old-time, it was a radio show back in the 1930s and 40s where a panel of experts were brought in to be stumped by the audience, by the radio audience who would send in questions. And if they were able to stump them, they won money and a set of encyclopedias. The show was immensely popular. It spawned off a series of Information Please almanacs. There was actually a series of films, which thanks to the book I learned about and found one on YouTube, very old. Maybe one day we'll play it here. But again, I'll put a link up if you want to see that. And a television show. Now, that's the thing I really want to track down. 12 episodes of a television show that ran over the summer. These guys were, and when I say guys, I shouldn't say guys. It was men and women. The main panel was men usually, but they often had guests on Hollywood types who would come on. Burgess Meredith did an episode of the TV show. God, I would love to see that. So I just, if you're a fan of old-time radio, if you're a fan of quiz shows, game shows, pick up a copy of Information Please by Martin Grams. You will not regret it. And again, I'll put links up in the show notes so that you can get a hold of that. All right, I'm going to take a quick break here. We'll run a promo, and when we come back, let's start talking about the Oscars.
What the hell is this, The Wonderful Billy Flynn?
Just some podcast that's supposed to be geeky. Podcasting's Rich Siegfried.
Did you try it?
I'm not going to try it. You try it.
Screw that noise. I'm not going to try it. Hey, Flinstress, let's get Mikey.
Do you mean critically acclaimed comedy rock star Mikey Mason, who hosts the Beer Power Time Machine podcast?
Yeah, but he won't listen. He hates everything.
Hi, I'm critically acclaimed comedy rock star Mikey Mason. I don't often listen to podcasts, but when I do, make mine Geek Radio Daily.
Hey man, that's a different promo.
Between love and madness lies Geek Radio Daily.
That's kind of accurate.
There are some things money can't buy.
GRD is free online.
Maybe she's born with it. Maybe it's Geek Radio Daily.
We'll take it.
Geek Radio Daily. All the geek without the wait. GeekRadioDaily.com.
And we're back here on the Chronic Rift. I was hoping to read off the iTunes review that I got recently for the Chronic Rift, but unfortunately, for some reason, iTunes is not loading up the comments. They're loading up my episodes, no problem, on my podcast player on my phone, but I can't seem to reach the comments. So to that person, and I can't even remember the person's name, I say thank you, and I say to the rest of you again, comments, star reviews, such a big thing to we podcasters. If you're a fan of any of the shows here on the network, even if it's not the Chronic Rift itself, if you're a fan of presenting the transcription feature, Weekly Podioplex, Generations Geek, head on over to the network and still place a review, and make sure that in the review you point out that you're there for that particular show. It is greatly appreciated. We'll get that show even more attention. Now, let's talk about the Oscars. This is what you've been waiting for, right? I mean, this is what you've been waiting for. I don't know about anybody else. I mean, certainly, like I said, I'm here doing this alone. And I realize I haven't watched the Oscars in years. I'm being perfectly honest, and it's like, then what the hell were you thinking about even doing a show that you haven't watched in years, that you don't really know most of the movies? Because you want to know something? Everybody's a flippin' expert when it comes to anything, but it's more than that. I'm not putting myself out there as an expert. I'm playing this Bill Murray style, because honestly, there is something laughable about this awards ceremony. Because what are most people more interested in? It's kind of like the Super Bowl. You don't watch the Super Bowl for the football. You watch the Super Bowl for the commercials, for the halftime show. You're watching the Oscars to see what they're wearing, what they're going to say to irritate, especially this year. You know you're going to wait to see what they're going to do to irritate the president, and that he'll get up in the morning and tweet ridiculously about it. And quite possibly, you're looking to see if maybe that one movie that you were shocked got nominated actually might be recognized. And when I talk about that movie, I'm talking about those movies that deal with science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And, you know, so am I, I'll be honest with you. And there's quite a list in terms of, for, you know, costuming, special effects, and stuff like that. Great. Score, even screenplay. But when it comes to the headliners, no, nothing there. Well, except for maybe The Shape of Water, which I know nothing about, but from what I understand, it's like a sci-fi fantasy type movie. And then, of course, you've also got Get Out. So let's talk about this. Let's start with the Best Picture here. We've got, and I'm going to bring over my other computer here so I can see this better, because here's the thing. It's like these glasses, they're, what do they call them? Not progressive. I wouldn't call it that, but they're like bifocals, but they're not bifocals, but they are. Basically. So, okay, first off, let's talk about this. First off, 8 movies. We need 8 movies for the Oscars as the Best Picture. I could have sworn that at one time it was 5. I guess the whole idea is everybody gets a participation trophy. But the thing is, even then, you look at these movies. All right, Call Me By Your Name, I don't know it. Darkest Hour, sure is a great film, but again, enough with Winston Churchill. Dunkirk. I'm the kind of guy that when you tell me I have to see a film, and everybody kept telling me you got to see Dunkirk, I don't see it. I still haven't seen Blair Witch. I refuse to do that when you tell me I got to see it. Now, Get Out. My wife wants to see this film. I thought it was actually like, you know, like Medea or the scary movie ones, but apparently, no, it's a serious horror film. So it probably won't get it, but I would like to see it just because I like Jordan Peele. Lady Bird, I have no clue. Don't know. Phantom Thread. Every time I see that, I think of Phantom Menace, so Star Wars, so it's out. The Post. I actually would like to see this film myself. It's basically, you know, about the Washington Post and stuff, and I love movies about newspapers and such. The Shape of Water, again, like I said, I hear science fiction, fantasy. I saw a meme that says it's basically Splash, which if that's the case, then yeah, I'm out. And then finally, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. It won't win simply because of the title, because whoever is announcing it, they'll go 3 billboards, everybody will start clapping, you'll never hear the rest of the title. So, you know, they're going to strategize that, and they won't do it. So my guess is I'm going for Get Out, but I wouldn't be surprised if Dunkirk gets it, because it's actually even shorter, because it's only 1 word. Now, actor in a leading role. Again, a great, you know, number of actors, some I recognize. Timothée Chalamet for Call Me By Your Name. Again, I don't know. Daniel Day-Lewis, apparently this is his last role ever, so maybe they'll give it to him, but then again, you know, they might think that's a fake for him to get the Oscar, and then he'll come back and say, well, I'm back, so no. Daniel Kaluuya for Get Out, possibly. It's a possibility. Gary Oldman, Darkest Hour. Again, we've talked about this, not happening. So that leaves us with Denzel Washington in Roman J. Israel Esquire, and I'll say yes because, well, it's Denzel. You know, it has to be Denzel. Actress in a leading role. Sally Hawkins for The Shape of Water. I don't know her. And again, science fiction never seems to really take. Frances McDormand, we've talked about this. 3 Billboards, that's out. She won't get it. Margot Robbie for I, Tonya may have been a great performance, but I mean, looking at the pictures of her, she just looks like a watered down version of Harley Quinn, so I think that's going to put people off. I can't say her name, and yet I should know this because I saw her on Saturday Night Live. Saoirse Ronan for Lady Bird. God, she's gorgeous, and what a great accent. Possibility. Maybe they'll go for that. But to me, you've also got Meryl Streep. There's your winner right there for the Post. So Meryl Streep is my pick for that. Actor in a supporting role. Now, I'm going to kick out Woody Harrelson already because of 3 Billboards. Forget that. Richard Jenkins, Shape of Water, science fiction, kick that out. That leaves us with Defoe, Plummer, and Rockwell. 3 badasses, okay? But Rockwell's going to be picked out because of 3 Billboards. So now we're down to Plummer and Defoe. Plummer has never received an award from my understanding here. So it's like, who do you give it to? Do you give it to longevity, or do you give it to the guy who's going to be most pissed off, Defoe? And Defoe is a scary guy when he's pissed off. So I'm going to go with Defoe for the Florida Project. All right. Next, actress in a supporting role. Allison Janney for I, Tonya. No, because she looks too much like Ursula K. Le Guin in the picture I'm looking at here. So no, that's out. Leslie Manville for Phantom Thread. We already said that, so no go. Laurie Metcalf. I love Laurie Metcalf. I would love if Laurie Metcalf won. But you've got that, and you've got her, and you've got Octavia Spencer for The Shape of Water, so she's out. But there's one other person, Mary J. Blige for Mudbound. First time I'm hearing of this film, first time I'm hearing of this role. Looking at the picture of her, though, my God, what a transformation from such a stunning woman to someone more plain and simple. I'm going to give it to Mary J. Blige. So hope she gets it. Animated feature film. My God, this ranges from the really stupid to what could probably be some really great film. I mean, we've got Boss Baby, which I want to see, but it's a stupid-looking film. Coco and Ferdinand, which I think are pretty much the same film, so they cancel each other out. Then there's The Breadwinner. I don't know. Every time I look at that, there's just something about it that's disturbing me with that image. So I'm going to go with Loving Vincent as Best Animated Feature Film. Also because I love the Vincent van Gogh episode of Doctor Who. Cinematography. Blade Runner 2049, Darkest Hour, Dunkirk, Mudbound, and The Shape of Water. Shape of Water and Blade Runner are out. Mudbound, I don't know how difficult it is to shoot a film like that. I don't know what you know. My guess is I'm going to go with Dunkirk. I'll give them that one, even though I'm never ever going to see the film. I'll give Dunkirk that one because I could imagine that has some impressive cinematography. Costume design. See, now we get into this whole thing of who handed out the best food at crafts. It's like you start getting a little, and I know, and I'm sorry to the costume designers that I'm belittling here, but to then also narrow it down to 5 when you look at some of the designs that are in some of these other movies. But anyway, you got Beauty and the Beast, Darkest Hour, Phantom Thread, The Shape of Water, and Victoria and Abdul, which I actually do want to see. I love a good Queen Victoria movie. But I'm going to go with, I'll go with Beauty and the Beast, even though I'll never see that film again also. Not because everybody said you had to, but because I still question why, when we have a fantastic animated feature, that was one of those too soon things. We really didn't need it. Best Directing, Dunkirk, Get Out, Lady Bird, Phantom Thread, and The Shape of Water. Now here's the thing. I'm going to kick out Dunkirk and Phantom Thread and The Shape of Water, simply because you know what, I'm sick and tired of this. I'm taking a stand because the other two are directed by a woman and an African American, and in the whole history, 90 years of the Oscars, women and African Americans each have only been nominated 5 times. And you want to know out of those 5 times how many have won? Let's say out of the 10 times, so we'll put the two together. How many have won? Once, for The Hurt Locker. That's it. All right, that was a woman. And I'm not saying that is a bad thing. I'm saying it's a bad thing as in that's it. That's all we got. So I'm telling those two to duke it out. But my hope is it's Jordan Peele because I love Jordan Peele and I think he's awesome. And actually, I'm going to look forward to seeing the film Get Out at some point. Documentaries. Do we really care? Documentary feature, documentary short story. I'm looking at these things here. Abacus, Small Enough to Jail, Faces, Places, Icarus, Last Men in Aleppo. I actually recognize Last Men in Aleppo, so I'm going to call that one for the feature. Short story or short document. Edith and Eddie. Heaven is a Traffic Jam on the 405. Heroin, Knife Skills, and Traffic Stop. I'm going to go with Heaven is a Traffic Jam on the 405 because I actually wouldn't mind that as a little placard on my wall. Film editing. No, I'm not even going to bother. Forget film editing. Forget it. Foreign language film. You want to know something? we need to see more foreign language films in this country to appreciate what the world has to offer. So we've got Fantastic Women, The Insult, Loveless, On Body and Soul, and The Square. Based on just the movie posters I'm looking at here, I'm going to go with The Square. That looks really cool. It comes from Sweden. So let's see how that goes. Makeup and hairstyling. Darkest Hour, Victoria and Abdul, and Wonder. I'm going to say probably Victoria and Abdul, although I wouldn't mind seeing Wonder win. My son Mikey went to see it, loved it. Music, original score, Dunkirk, Phantom Thread, The Shape of Water, Star Wars, The Last Jedi, and Three Billboards. Three Billboards is already out. Phantom Thread is already out because it and Star Wars will cancel each other out. Shape of Water, I'm going to go with Dunkirk. All right, so Dunkirk there. Are you marking these things down? Because, and if you're listening on the audio is going to be released a couple of days later. So if I get it, there'll be a little ding. If I got it, if I didn't get it, there'll be a little buzz to see where I'm going right or wrong. Original song, Mighty River from Mudbound, Mystery of Love from Call Me By Your Name, Remember Me from Coco, Stand Up for Something from Marshall, and This Is Me from The Greatest Showman. I'm going to go with This Is Me. Greatest Showman sounds like like we're going to see it eventually on Broadway as a musical, so there you go. There's your pick there. Production design, Beauty and the Beast, Blade Runner 2049, Darkest Hour, Dunkirk, Shape of Water. I'll give Shape of Water there, that one. Production design. Short film animated. Turns out Kobe's got a film in this. Kobe Bryant with Dear Basketball. Garden Party, Lou, Negative Space, and Revolting Rhymes. I'm going with Revolting Rhymes just because it sounds like a Jeopardy category on Saturday Night Live, but I'll go with that. Short film live action. DeKalb Elementary. Wow, the way this is written out here, I was going DeKalb Elementary, The 11 O'Clock, My Nephew Emmett, The Silent Child, Watu Wote, All of Us. I'm going to go with The Silent Child because I can always appreciate a silent child. Sound editing. Really? I have no horse in that race. Sound mixing. No. Visual effects. All right, let's talk about visual effects. Here we go. This is it. This is the one that all the geeks hang out for. Blade Runner 2049, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Kong, Star Wars, and War for the Planet of the Apes. Now, sadly, the only one I've seen is Guardians of the Galaxy. I didn't get a chance to see War. I know it's like, what are you doing? And I haven't seen Star Wars. If I go, it's because my son wants to go, and he wasn't as impressed with this one when he saw the trailers. So we're waiting for it to come out on DVD, and we'll catch it then. I'm going to give it to Guardians simply because that fight scene with Rocket in the woods is absolutely fantastic with Glenn Campbell's Southern Nights playing in the background. So visual effects, Guardians of the Galaxy. Writing, Call Me By Your Name, Disaster Artist, Logan, Molly's Game, and Mudbound. Frankly, I don't understand why Logan didn't get more attention as a movie because, frankly, that thing was just stunning. That is what a good comic book movie. I mean, everybody goes on about Deadpool and all because it, is raunchy. But you know what? Logan was just absolutely. If you haven't seen Logan, because you got fed up with all the Marvel movies and stuff, go see Logan. All right, because that should have done better at the box office. It should be doing better in sales. We should be sending a message to Marvel and Fox and saying, this is what we want. We don't want as much this. We want this with Logan. And to do a throwback to last week, maybe Black Panther might have been more to people's liking, or some people's liking, in terms of its social message, if it had the caliber of writing. And it was a good film. And I'm not saying it. I loved it. Don't get me wrong. But Logan. Best writing, original screenplay, The Big Sick, Get Out, Larry Bird. Wow, Lady Bird. Shape of Water, and Three Billboards. We've already said Three Billboards. Forget it. You're not getting anything. You should have called the movie Three Billboards, not Three Billboards Outside Ebbing. It's like you're setting up the plot in your title. Three Billboards. Oh, what's that about? Let's go check it out. Hey, marketing, pal. Come talk to me. We'll talk about marketing when you do the sequel. 4 Billboards or something. I don't know. I'm going with Get Out. Again, Jordan Peele writing. Come on. We got to give it to him. All right, so that's it. That's my picks for the Oscars. Oh my God, you thought, this guy's nuts. And yeah, you want to know something? Yeah, I am. I mean, I'm not even going to watch the show tonight because that's the beauty, too, of the internet today. The best of the best we'll watch tomorrow morning on YouTube. Think about it. Probably have a little discussion about the show, though, with my... Actually, I probably watch some of it, because there'll probably be some discussion in my media class tomorrow. Although most of the time they want to talk about the Grammys or the MTV Awards, but we'll see. We'll see. What about you? I mean, what do you think? Do you think that there's something there to all this? I'll tell you one thing. I will be glad when the Oscars are over. That god-awful ABC promo that shows nothing but the cool movies in their promo. It's like, and half of them aren't even in consideration for nomination. That's the thing. You know what I'm talking about. This monstrosity.
No one's ready for this.
Showtime.
Shall we?
Let's do it.
Did he kiss you?
Don't cry, don't cry, don't cry.
That's Husky stuff right there.
So hot, not trying to brag. We got that rat-a-tat-tat. Let's light it up like dynamite. We got platinum, we got gold. Our name in the envelope. Boom, boom with a cherry on the top.
The Academy Award for Best Picture.
There's a mistake. Moonlight, you won Best Picture.
Lauren, what did you do?
Whatever they do, we do it better. Whatever they do, we do it better.
And the Oscar goes to...
Jimmy Kimmel hosts The Oscars, live Sunday, March 4th, 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific on ABC.
That's the thing. It's like, all these great movies you're looking at, they're going, Wonder Woman? Daddy's Home 2, which wasn't as good as Daddy's Home, but it's like all these films, and you're not going to see... Maybe you'll see them in a little retrospective when Jimmy Kimmel does a song and dance, but that's about it. Hollywood isn't celebrating mainstream films. They're celebrating those films that have heart and soul. Well, no, that's not fair. I shouldn't say that, because now then, the fans of Wonder Woman and stuff and such will be like, what, that didn't have heart and soul? And I don't want to sound like I'm snooty either, but they're celebrating the films that are snooty. I'm sorry. I'm shocked that Get Out is in there. I think it would be a wonderful thing if Get Out wins in all its categories, because it's about time, and I'm not a horror fan. I'm going to watch this because my wife wants to see it and because I appreciate Jordan Peele. But I think that, frankly, the Oscars, it's why I've moved away from it. It's not celebrating everything Hollywood has to offer. And I don't know what it's going to take to do that. And I don't even just mean that in the political sense, the way everybody's like saying, black representation, women. I'm just talking about movies. Who wants to... I don't know. Again, I'm sure all the nominees are great films. I'm sure if I had Dan here, Dan would probably be telling me, Dan Persons, who does our movie reviews, would be telling me I'm missing out on something by not having seen them. And I will see some eventually. I'm sure at some point, especially once whoever wins Best Picture, whoever wins Best Actor, there will be that afterglow for days and people will be talking. And of course, sales will then go up. And at some point, my wife and I will be like, yeah, we should give this. I mean, that's what we did with Hidden Figures. We hadn't seen it. And it wasn't that we didn't want to see it again. And frankly, seeing Hidden, it's a beautiful, if you haven't seen Hidden Figures, go see that movie. You will not be disappointed. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Chronic Rift. Stay tuned, folks. Next week, I am joined for the entire hour by author Jeremy Brown as he talks about his book, Zero Limit. He's going back to the moon with his latest book, as he's done with his previous book. And we're going to spend the whole hour. We're going to bring some things to the table. We're going to talk about the book. We're going to talk about his fascination with the moon. Great book. Not available just yet, but it will be by the time I think we get this episode rolling here next Sunday. So until then, folks, thank you so much for listening. Once again, everyone, take care and have a great week. Hey, thanks for checking out this week's episode of The Chronic Rift. Make sure you head on over to iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Google Play, or wherever you find your great podcasts and subscribe to the Chronic Rift Network. Make sure you also leave us a comment on those pages as it helps us. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter at chronic_rift, or by visiting us at chronicrift.com. Until next week when we're talking with Jeremy Brown, this is John saying take care.